Hello, welcome back to my wildlife area. I am thrilled that not only has the pond been enjoyed by so many animals, but also that you've been enjoying it. The response to the pond in the pot video was overwhelming. I've never had so many requests for a follow-up video, but today we're making a bog garden in a tyre. Not quite as alliterative, but it's still going to be fun. Now, disclaimer, this is the second time that I have made a bog garden in this tyre because the first time it didn't go very well. We will learn from our mistakes and it will be better this time. I mean, it's still fun. It just means I get the joy of making a bog garden twice instead of just one time. Got this old tyre. I mean, you can do it in anything. If I had a solid based object, I'd use it, but I just found this tyre in the garden, thought that'll work. So a bog garden is an area of soil that is very slow to drain. So the most important thing is to sort out the drainage. So mistake number one I made, first time I made this, was right now you can see that there's a bin liner that is just kind of sitting inside, but the edges aren't going all the way up. I thought that would be enough to slow down the drainage, but because it's quite a small volume, it dried out too fast for my liking. So I'm going to keep this liner. So this is just a bin bag. If you've got a pond liner, use a pond liner. I don't have a pond liner, so I'm using bin bags. So I'm going to pop the bin bag in the bottom of the tyre. And this first layer is just to kind of cushion it a bit so that there aren't any harsh edges. I'm going to take a second bin bag. This is where I'm going to differ from last time. I'm going to take a second bin bag and this time open it up rather than having it double layered. It's always easier said than done, I find, with bags, other end. So now I'm going to put this inside. It's not quite big enough, but it's going to be better than it was. So I'll trim the edges around once I've got it filled with soil. So with a pond, you might remember we were trying to reduce the amount of nutrients in the soil as much as possible because we didn't want too much algae to grow. A bog garden is pretty much the reverse. You want loads of nutrients because in the wild, bog gardens will form and you'll get loads of leaves rotting in there and decaying and producing all of this nitrogen and all of this fertilizer. So you want to use just any old compost, really. I've got here the leftovers from the coir from making the pond and some just multi-purpose compost. And I'm going to start filling this in. One thing I will say about compost is if at all possible, get peat-free compost. So it has to say peat-free somewhere on the bag because otherwise I have checked all of the brands and unless it specifically says peat-free, there will be some peat in your garden compost. And the reason you want to avoid peat as much as possible is because peat is the product of moss in bogs, peat bogs or peat marshes, that is decomposing in anaerobic conditions and takes thousands of years to form. Literally takes thousands of years for just about a centimetre of peat to develop. And because, like fossil fuels like coal, it is plant growth from yesteryear that is being trapped in the soil, it is an amazing carbon storage system. And in the UK we have loads of peat bogs and they are trapping so much carbon into the soil and not releasing it into the atmosphere. But of course, once we start digging it up and draining the peat bogs, then we're releasing a lot of this carbon. So it's a non-renewable resource, and using it in compost where there's no reason to use it, just use, you know, modern like compost from your compost bin type compost is just as good a replacement. And it is so much better for the environment. I was actually planning on doing a whole video on peat bogs where I would travel to a peat bog, but obviously that's not happening right now. Maybe we'll get there in the future, but they are an incredible habitat, but they are one we really need to protect. So as gardeners, buy peat free wherever possible. So as with the pond and the pot, you could use any old container. Old sinks work really well for this kind of thing. Old bathtub. If you had a bigger garden, you could dig a hole straight into the ground and put a pond liner in. And if you want to make a pond, leave the pond liner as is. If you want to make a bog garden and it's big enough, just pierce a few holes in the liner, because normally you do want some drainage, because otherwise it'll just be wet, waterlogged soil. Because this is so small, I found it drains too quickly with drainage. So there's so much evaporation in such a small volume of soil. So hopefully having this extra liner will help. One of the great things about this is it's just making mud pies. I'm just playing around in the mud. You know it's been a good day when you've got dirt underneath your fingernails. And you know what I've forgotten to do? I've forgotten to put the hessian back. So this hessian was just to create a bit of a link. So I don't need all of it. I'm going to trim off this bit. One thing I have found with the hessian being exposed before the bog garden was done was because it's wicking up a lot of the water from the pond. It does make the pond dry out quite a bit faster. So something to bear in mind. I'm just going to tuck that under the edge there. And this will give the plants something to grow over so that they can kind of creep over the edges. And it just means I don't have a big hole in between the bog garden and the pond. Okay, just pressing it down a bit just to make sure it doesn't all sink down as soon as I start to water it. That's the soil done. Now, the other part to a bog garden is obviously the plants. And you've got to be careful with which plants you choose, because you're looking for plants that like to have a lot of water around their roots. You can find these at pond shops. I bought mine online. This was one of the best parcels I have received. And I've tried to stick with native plants. Now, this was a question I got in the pond video. Why are you trying to stick with native plants? And that is because although lots of animals love plants from any countries, so nectar is nectar after all, so things like bees, animals can use non-native plants, and it can be great in the garden. It means that you can extend the flowering season. But a lot of animals are specialists. And so that means that they can only use one particular species of plant. And obviously the British specialists have co-evolved with British species. So, for example, there are butterfly species where their caterpillars will only feed on one particular plant species. So having native plants, one, it kind of supports growers of British plants, and two, it helps the specialists. When it comes to aquatic plants, so ones that are actually in the water, it's quite easy for them to escape into the waterways and become invasive. So things like Elodea is a non-native oxygenating water plant, very common, but because it's water-based, it makes it easier for it to get into streams and rivers and travel around the country that way. So that's why it's even more important if you are using non-native plants and you're then getting rid of them or cutting them back, pruning them, to make sure that you compost them and make sure that they're dead before they go anywhere. So different plants like different amounts of water, and because of the way that this tyre is shaped, the edges will be slightly drier than bang slap in the middle. So I'm putting the ones that really like water, the almost marginal plants in the middle, and more of the bog plants around the edge. So it's quite important if you want to hide the edges of the pond to make sure you've got some creeping plants. So plants that instead of growing straight up tend to grow across the soil. So this is one of them. This is Ajuga Pyramidalis. And you can see that lots of bog plants, especially native ones, have got beautiful flowers. And so it's just another example. Just because you think bog, you might think, oh, it's a bit of a swamp, a marsh. Oh no, they can have so many beautiful flowers. This one is called Pennyroyal. It's in the mint family. It's also called mosquito plant because the smell of the leaves smells like mint, has menthol, and it helps. They used to rub it on themselves to get rid of mosquitoes. This one is Creeping Jenny, and that one will not only creep over soil, but it will also creep over the surface of the water. So I'm popping it right over here. So hopefully this wet hessian will encourage it to grow over here. It won't get scorched by the hot rubber in the sun. So it'll encourage it to grow over here, to kind of hide this plastic edge and to slowly creep over into the water. Naturalise the edge of the borders, so rather than having to like paint or cover them up too much, just use plants. Just cover everything with plants. That's my solution to most things in life, let's be honest. One of the lovely things about bog gardens is that it's impossible to drown in them. So if you have children that are very young and you don't yet want to have a pond, you can still have a bog garden. You can walk through them. In general, they're a little bit lower maintenance because in big ponds you might be thinking about pumps or having to clear them out in winter to get the leaves out of them. Bog gardens, they just grow. And even if you live in a clay soil area, you might not even need a liner. You might just have a patch of your garden that's constantly waterlogged and like nothing grows in here or the roots start rotting. Like, make the most of the opportunity you've got. You've got a ready-made bog garden, which is going to be perfect for grass snakes and frogs and toads and newts and all of these wonderful animals that I'm trying desperately to encourage to my little patch of London. So yeah, make the most of what you've got. I'm trying to think about height as well. So here we've got a very big buttercup that I know will come to about this sort of height. So I'm placing it kind of above the creeping jenny, which I know will crawl over here. I've got my ragged robin and my purple loosestrife at the back because they will form these very tall purple spikes. And then I've got things like these reeds, and this is a yellow flag iris, our native iris. These will form beautiful structural spikes. So again, I'm putting them at the back so that they're not going to block the smaller plants from my window just over there. The second fatal mistake I made when I first planted out this bog garden was underestimating the squirrels. Being in London, there are a lot of squirrels in this area. I have seen at least 5 or 6 at any one time, so there's probably even more than that. And unfortunately, it's in squirrels' nature to dig. They like digging through soil, and soft soil like this that provides very little resistance is apparently irresistible to squirrels. And they were digging it up, and I had planted about 15 plants in here and only 4 of them survived the attack of the squirrels. And I've tried everything to stop them. Not even the amount of water in here would stop them. It's one reason why I want this to be even less draining than it was before. Hopefully the boggy conditions make it a little bit more resistible for the squirrels. But one thing I have found that works is topping the top off with gravel. So I quite like the look of bare soil. Other people don't. I found that bark chippings does not stop the squirrel, only gravel does. So this step is entirely optional, but if you do have squirrels, this is one way to stop them. And there you have it, a bog garden in an old tyre. So you didn't have to dig down or anything, so it's fine for you renters like me. And yeah, just add water and see what grows. One of the biggest ways I have made it look more natural is just to put stuff around it. I was wandering around this big communal garden and happened to find 3 big tree stumps, and my God, what a difference they have made to this area. So I put the stumps in, and then either in the holes in the wood or in the gaps between the stumps, I packed in a load of compost and planted them up again with some ferns, with some low mat growing things. Sorry, there is a very loud robin over there. Hello, welcome to the garden. What do you think? Robin thinks it looks lovely.